Welcome to the Compost Pile, a podcast where we break down gardening, homesteading, and more. Join your hosts, David Poole and Aaron Barnhill, as they pile up information and break it down so that you can be more successful in the garden.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Compost Pile, your podcast for all things gardening and homesteading. With me as always is my co-host David Poole, owner of Mid-County Farm and Feed, and your expert, my expert. What are we talking about today, David?
We're going to talk about some general cultural practices, or, probably wondering what the hell is a cultural
What's
practice?
culture? What does that mean? I consider myself a cultured person.
A cultural practice is basically the way we do things. So we've actually already talked about some cultural practices in some of our other episodes.
Permaculture. Is that what that means?
No.
Okay.
I mean, cultural practices could lead into permaculture.
Okay.
That's cultural practices is a huge part of permaculture. But
it's just how we do
things like intentionality and different elements, different activities that we do. Because if you think back to our very first episode, we talked about being stewards of the soil. Essentially, was an example that I gave. We're basically everything that we do has a pro and a con, and with anything in life in general. But we want to be able to assess what are the good things that are going to happen by performing this task one way, and what's going to happen if I do it the other way. And we're going to choose the one that has the most positive outcome.
So it's kind of like having a plan.
Yeah.
Having a design, being intentional. Okay.
Yeah, like a simple one that we've already talked about. We talked about watering and, how we want to water at the soil level because where moisture is being absorbed into the root system and into the plant. It's also less wasteful.
So after you told me about that in the first couple episodes, I stopped watering my plants like I was pretending I was a fireman.
Yeah,
I used to do that. I would go outside and be like, "Ah!" No, I'm just kidding. I didn't do that. But yeah, but it was fun, right? It's funny.
Yeah, it's essentially it's a simple example of an activity that every gardener is going to do at some point or another, but how they perform that task.
Right.
So,
I did learn what the soaker function on my multi-nozzle was. So, that makes so much sense. You water at the level, right?
Yeah.
Because it just waters right there at the soil level.
Yeah.
So even something as simple as that is important.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to cover today maybe a couple other cultural practices that we haven't touched on that I don't think it's not like watering or fertilizing. But the first one that really comes to mind is crop rotation.
Okay. Yeah.
So you find like from old planting methods and you think about like major agriculture, you're planting large volumes or as a home gardener, maybe a small volume of the same item in the same area, and you're typically planting it in the same spot season after season.
Yeah.
Like you set up your trellis in this one area because it makes sense to grow your cucumbers.
Because that's like where your sun comes in at the right spot. Right, yeah.
But we want to be able to look at things a little bit deeper, and we want to be able to make a plan to where we can take those same crops and we need to be able to move them around the garden.
Sure, yeah. Move them into different soils.
Yeah,
right?
different soils.
Different soils, because if you have the same crop in a container and you're moving it around the garden, that's not really the same, right? Yeah, it needs to be in totally different soils. It's funny because the time of the year it is right now, we just had Thanksgiving, basically, and the first time we ever learned about crop rotation was in elementary school when we're talking about Thanksgiving and Native Americans and the Europeans and their cultural exchange. And the whole legend goes that the Europeans learned about crop rotation from the Native Americans, right? Who were perceived as being much less civilized or much less sophisticated, but they knew about, hey, we can't just plant corn here all the time.
Yeah.
Right? Because you'll deplete the soil.
Yeah, you gave the example of like was it the almonds where they planted it. I forget what it was.
In the desert?
Yeah.
Almonds and pistachios are just planted straight up in the desert. Yeah.
So
it's wild.
Thinking about like the impacts that you have by planting the same thing.
That's a bad culture, by the way. Just planting like nut trees in the desert in a state that has water issues and it takes 17 times more water to produce those nuts.
That's a bad cultural practice.
That's a bad culture, man. I don't like that.
Yeah.
But I guess it's cool to have a $5 bag of pistachios. Anyway, rant over. Rant over.
Yeah, so when you're planting the same thing in the same soil over and over again, that one particular plant might use a lot of a particular set of nutrients. So
like nitrogen,
yeah,
right?
We might be depleting the soil. So if we're planting something, a heavy nitrogen feeder over and over again, season after season, we might lead to nitrogen deficiency.
And this is why in America we're seeing all these, we're seeing the soybean farmers talk about it, right? Because they have to rotate their corn crop with soybeans.
Yep. That's the example you gave last time that was coming to mind.
Yeah, it's coming to mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So nutrient deficiencies are a big thing and why crop rotation is important. But as a home gardener on a smaller scale, disease and pest resistance comes to mind for me more. So one of the reasons why I feel that I've become very successful at being able to grow more naturally and without the use of pesticides or fungicides, whatever it might be, is because I'm constantly moving things around. I no longer have this like specific layout that I stick to season after season.
You change it up.
Yeah, we change it up.
Yeah.
We move things around. Ideally, when you're looking at crop rotation, you want to be able to move things on maybe a 3-year rotation.
Okay, that makes sense.
But that can be really difficult as a small gardener because some gardeners may only have one bed. They may only have 2 beds. But anything that you can do to move things around and keep the soil from basically building up bad pathogens or building up like overwintered insect pressure is extremely helpful. So crop rotation is essentially a natural way to prevent pests and disease from building up in the soil and getting to a point where it is more difficult and you might not be able to maintain that kind of natural approach that most home gardeners are going for nowadays.
So this seems to me to be the perfect episode to ask you a question that I've had on my mind for a long time. And it's really like you were saying, you move things around kind of on a 3-year cycle. What is the best way to keep up with that, right? I've been trying to think about, do I need to go to Office Depot and get a binder for my garden, right? And kind of like list it out. I'm not a very organized person, but it does take quite a bit of planning and organizing a garden. So what do you do to keep track of all of that?
Personally, I don't.
So you just keep it all up here?
I do because like I'm in the garden almost daily, multiple times a week, and I kind of just I have it in my head.
Okay.
But obviously that does not work for everybody.
Yeah, I mean some people are going to be much more laymen or hobbyists, or this is your job, right?
You should have a notebook. I should have a notebook or a binder that I'm documenting when I planted things.
And that's the whole thing is like I need to have that, and I've never done it because I'm kind of like you. I just kind of like keep it in my head and I vibe with it, but I know it's a bad practice. I know it's a bad culture. I should mark it down.
And I believe that a lot of the things that I'm terrible at growing at or I'm not very successful at, I could have resolved my problem because whenever I went to the next year and I grew that crop again, I would have went back and looked at my notes and saw what I did.
Yeah,
and I would have been like, okay, this is what I did.
Right.
Let's do some research and figure out what I'm missing because I didn't get the result that I was going for. Mm-hmm. So in itself, like note taking and tracking and documenting your wins and successes is to me a cultural practice because it's no different than how you water. If you're not documenting it and knowing what your successes and failures are, then it is going to definitely impact. Yeah. Or you're going to be like me and some of the things that I just don't do well with, I plant them over and over again, and I do the same thing. Just nothing changes.
Repeat the same experiment.
You're broke. You're in that vicious cycle.
Yeah. No, I mean it's that, but there's a little more to it. I want to keep a notebook to say I planted these things at this time. I harvested these things at this time, and maybe even do like a diagram of my plot or my yard or my containers, so I know what all of my annuals and perennials are, and I don't do that. And really why I want to do that and get more organized is because I've started saving seeds. Yeah. Right? So some things that I grow, and I harvest before they go to seeds, I'll let 1 or 2 straggle and become mature so they can seed, and I do that. And now I'm so disorganized, and I have like Ziplocs everywhere with seeds in them, and I don't have a good way to store them, and it's becoming a problem. And now my garage has rats in them, and now the rats are eating the seeds, and it's just this whole thing. I need a seed vault, and I need a notebook, and I need to make that culture, and I have it.
Yep.
Yeah. So maybe there's something on Amazon I could get. I don't know.
There's bound to be something simple. So for me, I just know that I need a calendar book.
That's a good idea.
I need basically I need like a journal,
like a planner. Yeah, a planner. Okay.
Something that I can document and I can track the days and I can write my notes, and then I might be able to make a quick sketch of like the bed that I planted something in today.
Yeah.
Hey, I planted this in bed A. Next year I'm going to plant it in bed B or C.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be that difficult.
No,
you're right.
I don't have to draw out my whole garden every single time. I just need to know what got planted where, when, and so that I know I can go back, because I know in my head when I want to plant things, and I could honestly get a lot more out of my space by simply documenting it down. Because a lot of times I'm just in a hurry. I'm like, oh, got to get this in.
Yeah.
Like the onions right now. I have a bundle of onions just waiting to be planted, and I've been busy, but I know they got to go in, but I'm wasting precious time. Whereas if I'd have been a little more prepared and planned, it would have already been in.
A little more thought out. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm probably going to go to Ross and get one of those. Ross is a great place to get like planners and stuff. Yeah. I'm going to go get one, one of those week by week planners. I think that's what I'm going to do. When we're talking about culture, you were talking about I'm not utilizing my space like I could. Is that another cultural thing? Is like, how much do I have planted? What's planted here? Like being intentional with the sun and the soil, and overplanting and underplanting.
Yeah, and we talked about companion planting and diversity. That's a cultural practice, versus just spacing things out and having a bed of tomatoes or a section of tomatoes,
like monocropping,
peppers. We put these groupings, and then we have all this empty space. So planting diversely, planting densely is a cultural practice, because that dense planting might be acting as a living mulch.
Sure,
It's covering the soil surface, preventing weeds and competitive plants that we don't want in the garden at all from ever popping up.
And we talked a few episodes back when we were talking about companion planting. I told you that my unsung hero this past year has been basil. I just planted basil like I was Oprah. You get a basil, you get a basil, you get a basil. And I think that it actually kept a lot of those plants safe. And that was kind of a cultural thing. And that was part of me gathering my seeds, is that I wouldn't pick the basil. I just let it go. You know what I mean? I just let it go. I let it flower. And it was incredible for all the pollinators. I've never seen more bees around my garden than when I let all the basil shoot up their big seed pods and just have those brilliant little white flowers on it. Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah.
Up until maybe not today, because today it was 40 something degrees most of the day. So the bees and pollinators are probably not very active, but so even several days back, because we're moving into, it's now December, we're still seeing bee and pollinator activity.
That's because we're in zone 9, baby. Come on.
Because of that intentionality in planting a diverse space.
Yeah.
So, that's a great cultural practice. And I believe, we talked about planting, that dense planting can act as a living mulch. Mulching is a cultural practice.
Yeah.
So it's about protecting the soil, insulating it. We've talked about that in almost every episode so far. But one of the ways that you can act as a living mulch as we move into kind of this off season or the winter, or there's a lot of people that just don't like a fall garden. They're not big into planting.
They don't want lettuce.
They're not into greens. They don't like beets and other things, turnips.
Yeah. I wish we could grow rutabaga here, but anyway, go ahead. That was a side.
But one of the things that you can do as a cultural practice is plant cover crops.
Right, okay.
So cover crops might be usable items that actually could benefit, they'd be harvestable in a sense, depending on what it is. But at the same time, it might be something that's not necessarily harvestable, but you're creating a living mulch, you're covering the soil, and intentionally planting certain things, such as give some examples of winter, might be crimson clover.
Yeah, clover. Yeah.
We
Of
might
course.
plant some type of winter legume or winter pea. There's Austrian winter peas when you're doing large scale cover
Like,
crops.
are they like climbing peas or?
Yeah, or like you just kind of let them grow.
Okay, yeah.
You could also be planting like English peas
Because legumes fix the nitrogen in the
Right.
soil, right? Okay, yeah.
So
yeah.
while nothing else is planting, and instead of leaving the soil barren, that cover crop is helping keep that microbe web and that living aspect in the soil active. It's helping keep it insulated. It's helping keep noxious weeds that might come in the winter and get established and drop seeds. But then it also, like those legumes are adding back nitrogen.
Right.
You could do what they call like the chop and drop method, where at the end of the cool season, you could basically take some of these items and chop them, drop them on top of the soil, acting
That's its own mulch.
It's its own
Right,
mulch, still essentially.
And I've seen that before too. I've seen people grow like alfalfa grass.
Yep.
And it gets really tall. Or goldenrod, right? People that keep bees. I know they grow like goldenrod and then you just chop it and drop it. And then I see people like pull black plastic over it and cover it down. Those are all different things.
When you chop and drop, you're also adding organic matter back into the soil.
Right, yeah.
So there's more items to break down. You're adding more nutrients back into the soil.
It's kind of a compost,
Yeah.
right? And that's another cultural thing is composting,
Yep.
I think. And that's kind of like, I don't know if I'm right on this, but I feel like when we're talking about cultures, there's like macro and micro cultures, so there's definitely cultures that big farms would do, and then there's cultures that small individuals would do. And I think that composting is something that I really do on every day because I try not to be wasteful. You know what I mean? And there's so much stuff every day that people just throw away that you don't need to. You can just compost it.
When you think about like as a cultural practice, like and just being a gardener in general, it costs a lot of money in a sense to get a garden started and grow.
Yeah.
So for me, the ideology that like I want to reduce my costs because theoretically I could go buy it cheaper, but I'm growing something that's nutritious
Right.
and I want to have less waste. And then every bit of waste that I have that's not disease or pest ridden can go into that compost pile.
Right back in.
And it's in turn going back in. And when you mentioned earlier, like cultural practices, and you brought up permaculture, that's exactly what permaculture is it's sustainability, it's no waste, and
Right.
everything, you're closing circles. So from start to finish.
And it's like just kind of like letting nature do its job.
Yeah.
And I feel like I'm not an expert on big farming. You know what I mean? I know a little bit about it, but I'm a layman. But I feel like there's a lot of unhealthy cultural practices in that. And don't get me wrong, the new green revolution that happened after World War II was amazing because we all have 70-cent bell peppers at the supermarket. I get it. You know what I mean? I really do. I get it. But when we're talking about like the trees in the desert, I've seen it. It kind of breaks your heart. It is a bad culture, but I mean, people have to eat, and it's nice to have cheap food. So I don't really know how to square that sometimes.
Yeah.
But the way that I do square it is by growing my own vegetables when I can.
You grow what you can.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And I do this balance of things where, my fiance, she loves bell peppers and she wants me to grow bell peppers, but I'm like, I'd never really get a high yield. So I just grow hot peppers. I grow all these other things that I can do well. And we'll just get those bell peppers from the supermarket because they're way cheaper than what I can grow and what I can yield. And that's kind of how I.
Weighing out those balances is essentially in itself a cultural practice because we talked about in the beginning, pros and cons of every action. If I'm growing something that I'm not going to use, then I'm being wasteful.
You are being wasteful.
And I'm wasting resources from the soil. And, sometimes you have to try something to know that, like, maybe this isn't something I want to do anymore. But if you're continually growing something and being unsuccessful and you're not willing to figure it out, then you are wasting.
Yeah.
And you brought up, like, big agriculture. And I think one of the biggest cultural practices that we haven't touched on. And as we've seen the kind of the evolution of gardening at home from like my grandfather, where we were tilling and rowing a garden.
Right, rows. Everybody had rows.
Now we're into raised beds, but still that ideology of no-till is gotten very strong, and it's something that we don't talk a lot about, like tilling the garden at work anymore like we used to. And that's because people have quickly come to realize that like tilling the garden has a lot of negative effects, and it's a cultural practice that like we try to encourage people to evolve away from, because we talk about all those microbes and the soil fungi web and all the life that's down there. Tilling disrupts that. So the no-till method, layering,
you're breaking all that mycelium
mulching
up. Yeah,
you're creating that. It's breaking down over time, and it's just a constant chain of events that's happening, and you're feeding the soil, keeping it alive, keeping it natural.
What's that new? So it's not new. It's probably really old, and I can't remember what it is. But there's a new to me method, and it's making rows, but you're not tilling. You're building them up, and it's a German word. I can't think of it. It's like
there's hugelkultur.
Hugelkultur, that's it. Yeah,
and you can,
and you're kind of like reverse mulching. You're putting your big aggregates and all that stuff, and you're making these mounds and
putting logs and sticks.
Yeah,
and on the bottom, like larger, more dense particles, essentially, and then you're coming on top of that with like smaller sticks and twigs, then maybe leaves and other debris, and then you're coming on top with like a finished grade soil.
And soils,
and over time, all that is breaking down, and that soil web stays alive.
And it kind of makes these rows, but not tilling, right?
And you can take that same. It's a really popular method for even in raised bed gardening, because when you think about, like, ideally you want a raised bed to be pretty deep. 6 inches is not really enough.
That's not a raised bed.
It's enough for some, like, maybe if we're growing some onions or something. Something that's not really that's not going to grow really deep, or have a really big, vast root system.
What is this, a raised bed for ants?
The hugelkultur method is widely used in developing raised beds, because it's an economical way for somebody getting into garden to bring in debris that might be available for free.
Everybody's got leaves in their yard,
Yeah.
right? You got pine straw in your yard. You got dead. I have a tree that just sheds limbs all the time, and that's the method I use for my raised beds, and it helps you also get like a lot of that height you want to, even if it's not all soil.
Yeah.
We don't want to bend over. Bending over sucks.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can, all that stuff's going to break down, and you're creating that ecosystem in the soil from the very start. Yeah. So it's a great method, and it's a great practice and an economical way to get going.
So one thing, and I don't want to sound like I hate demonizing large-scale agriculture, because, like I said, it's the reason why we're not starving to death, right? But I did see something a couple years ago that was from NASA, and it's funny that no one really pays attention to it, because it does make you not like large-scale agriculture. But NASA came to the conclusion that large-scale farming and tilling, specifically tilling that happens with very large machines and in the breadbasket of our country in the center, where everyone's growing grains, essentially,
right,
which you need, corn and barley and all of the grains where you make rows. When the people at certain times of the year till, right, because everyone does it all at once. So when people till out all of their acreage, it actually suspends particles in the atmosphere, right? Because you can think of it just like anything else. When you drive your truck down a dry, dusty road, you see the roots. That's happening with tilling too. And since everyone's doing it at one time, we have a tremendous amounts of tons of particulates suspended in the atmosphere for a couple weeks at a time. And that actually contributes more to greenhouse warming effect than carbon emission does. Yes. And it was like, kind of blew my mind. It's a temporary thing, because obviously the particulates fall back down. But I don't know how all of our viewers are going to know about, I don't know where they're going to stand on climate change, but it is real. And if you have a garden and you pay attention and you watch the seasons, the climate's always changing. So it'd be great to like limit a lot of those effects, right? And that's a cultural thing, is tilling.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I don't know they could do what they do on that scale without it, but it'd be great to maybe try to work towards it.
Can't have acres of raised beds.
No, you can't have acres of raised
It's not-
beds, but it's maybe instilling more permaculture techniques is the way to go, because you can have acres of apple orchards and then a row in between, things that like mitigate those harms.
Yep.
You know what I mean? But maybe they're not as cost effective. And we don't have to worry about that as home gardeners.
No.
Because we're not crunching these little pennies. So I respect their plight, because a lot of times they'll lose
It's
in
very
a season.
very easy to lose.
So easy to just. It's easy for them to go an entire year and then they go, oh, I guess I owe $400,000 for this year instead of making money.
Yeah.
But these are cultural things, right? I'm kind of coming around on what you're talking about culture, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can see like the larger impacts and larger scale farming.
Yeah.
But those the same things happen to us as home gardeners,
Yeah.
but on a more micro scale. And I think you have to be very intentional about what you do. You have to be willing to document change
Yeah.
and think of everything, and it's difficult to think of everything because we're on the go nowadays. It's a fast moving society, but we've got to be able to take a little time and observe. And I think for me, a cultural practice, and it may not be viewed as one, but just observation, spending time, like not doing in the garden, just seeing what's happening. Like you mentioned about seeing like tons of pollinators. You're stopping and you're looking at the impact of what you've done and seeing what is successful and what's not, and you're learning from it, and you're becoming kind of immersed in it.
Yeah.
To me, observation has become my favorite part
Number one
of
tool.
growing anything. Sometimes I could care less about what I actually get out of it. I'm more interested in what actually is different and what's happening in the space.
And when you have a beautiful space and a successful space, you want to be in it more.
Yeah.
The reason why I still have pollinators up into this weather, I have butterflies in my backyard, is because I planted a beautiful passion flower and it's just taken off.
We have one in the middle of ours.
I sit back there under my passion flower. I'm like, oh yeah.
I think again might not be viewed as a cultural practice by most, but I mean like creating a space that's aesthetically pleasing. Yes, like sometimes you're trying to do things as cheap as possible, but for me, if the space is not inviting and I didn't create this space that like welcomes me in and like has like some aesthetics to it, I'm less prone to actually want to get out there and immerse myself in it. So I'm kind of creating this little world, and what that looks like is different for every single person. But I think you do have to think about like the looks, the aesthetics, the feel of the garden in which you're creating, because it puts you more into it.
Absolutely, yeah. Anything else about cultures that you want to get into?
No, I think those are some of some key items that I really thought we hadn't touched on yet when we're talking about fundamentals. So just a quick recap. No tilling. We're keeping our soil ecosystem living and active. Cover crops act as a living mulch. We're putting organic matter back into the soil. We can use them to affix nitrogen.
We can chop and drop.
Yep. So keeping something growing all the time, even if we aren't growing something for our own personal use.
Yeah.
And then, crop rotation. Moving things around, doing our best to prevent disease and pest pressure buildup in the soil, so that we can grow more naturally without inputs. So ideally, moving into a state of permaculture, which we'll talk about down the road.
Well, that's good. I've learned a lot. I think one thing I've learned is, culturally speaking, at least, I'm going to go buy a planter and I'm going to keep track of the garden when we grow it next season. I'm going to plant some onions coming up in this next week, but in the spring, I'm definitely going to be writing stuff down. I'm definitely going to be doing that.
Yeah, for sure.
I hope you guys learned something too. And for me and David, we'll see you guys here next time.
Later.